It is June 1st, 2026. I hope you are doing well, no matter where in the world you are watching this analysis from. At this moment, 440 kilograms of uranium, enriched to a level close to what is required for nuclear weapons, remain stored inside Iran. That material is hidden beneath approximately 85 meters of solid granite, and over recent months, Tehran has repeatedly delivered a very clear message to the entire world. No one is going to get their hands on it. Not the IAEA, not Kazakhstan, not a diplomatic agreement, not a United Nations resolution. No one. But here is the detail that should truly capture your attention. All indications suggest that the US military has not spent the weeks following Operation Midnight Hammer reorganizing, reassessing the situation, or seeking a diplomatic pause. According to multiple signs, it has used that time to calculate, update intelligence, and refine its plans. Meanwhile, the aircraft tasked with dealing with targets exactly like this one has remained on alert at Diego Garcia with a highly specific set of coordinates already integrated into its planning systems. However, there is a second revelation that completely changes how many people understand the current situation. Iran's rejection of the agreement proposed by Kazakhstan does not appear to have been a negotiating tactic or an attempt to buy time while waiting for a shift in US policy. According to numerous analysts studying signals coming from Tehran, it was a declaration of intent. We are talking about a government that has lost much of its air defense network, has seen portions of its missile-related leadership eliminated, has suffered the destruction of numerous enrichment centrifuges, and is facing economic losses estimated at $500 million per day due to the naval blockade. Even so, that same government has just informed the world that it will not surrender the final strategic asset it considers essential to its survival. That is not the behavior of an administration seeking to negotiate. It is the behavior of an administration that appears to have accepted how the final chapter of this confrontation may unfold. Let me know in the comments which country you are watching from, because this discussion involves perspectives from across the globe. I want to understand how this situation is viewed from different regions. Everything presented in today's analysis is based exclusively on open source information, publicly available intelligence reports, and documented IAEA communications compiled for educational and strategic understanding purposes. In this video, we will examine what the US military establishment has been quietly building since April 2025, and why the mountain where Iran safeguards its uranium may not provide the level of security Tehran expected. We will analyze the surveillance and strike architecture currently operating over the region, the aircraft involved, and the specific roles that are rarely explained in mainstream media. We will also take a closer look at the technical challenge posed by the so-called Pickaxe Mountain, a facility that presents engineering problems very different from those previously faced by B-2 bombers. All indications suggest that the Pentagon has spent recent weeks studying how to address precisely that challenge. Stay until the end, because the strategic dimension of this story, the element that very few people are connecting into a single analysis, is where everything that is happening truly begins to make sense. Iran declared that its uranium was untouchable. The question is, what has the United States built to respond to that claim? Let us begin with the facts. The 440 kilograms stored inside Pickaxe Mountain are enriched to 60%. That figure is not merely a technical statistic. At that enrichment level, the material could serve as the basis for approximately 11 nuclear weapons if it were further processed to military-grade purity. Aware of that reality, the Director General of the IAEA personally traveled to Astana in an effort to finalize a transfer agreement. The plan involved relocating all of the material to Kazakhstan, a country that produces roughly 38% of the world's uranium, hosted the international talks with Iran in 2013, and also operates the only international nuclear fuel bank currently in service. Kazakhstan was not chosen at random. It likely represented the most credible neutral custodian the international community could offer. Nevertheless, Iran responded negatively. It was not a conditional rejection, nor was it a request for additional time. The internal instruction attributed to the supreme leadership was straightforward. The uranium will not leave the country. That response sent a very clear message to analysts in major capitals around the world. When a government states that surrendering nuclear material would make it vulnerable, it is not speaking solely about reactor fuel. It is describing a strategic asset considered essential to its survival. The word vulnerable effectively ended much of the debate over the program's exclusively civilian purposes and opened an entirely different discussion. So why has the American response appeared this way? Many observers argue that Washington looks weak, that it is not enforcing its red lines, and that it is simply waiting while Iran gains time. That perception is understandable if one looks only at the surface of events. However, the operational picture may be very different. During the Shangri-La dialogue held in Singapore, the Secretary of Defense publicly stated before military representatives from 40 countries that the United States retains the full capability to resume strike operations and that its arsenals remain sufficient for such missions. Statements of that kind, delivered before a large portion of Asia's defense community, are often interpreted as deliberate messaging. The signal is that operational plans remain updated, resources remain available, and the military posture has not changed significantly since April 2025. Meanwhile, the naval blockade continued exerting economic pressure on Iran's security apparatus. Various reports point to delays in payments to mid-level IRGC commanders, a particularly sensitive situation in a system whose stability depends heavily on a steady flow of financial resources. The response from Iran's foreign ministry was equally revealing. Tehran stated that there will be no understanding with Washington as long as the naval blockade remains in place. It is worth examining that position carefully. What it suggests is that the primary instruments of American pressure must first be removed before Iran would even consider surrendering a portion of what it possesses. That can hardly be described as a concession. Rather, it appears to be the exact definition of a scenario in which one side retains all of its assets while giving up very little in return. Washington's response did not come in the form of press releases or dramatic public statements. The response was far quieter. The naval blockade remained in effect, military assets stayed in position, and the aircraft responsible for monitoring Iran's nuclear infrastructure continued carrying out their intelligence-gathering missions without interruption. At this stage, Iran appears to retain only two strategic cards of genuine value: the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium and the geopolitical significance of the Strait of Hormuz. Virtually everything else has been degraded, constrained, or neutralized. When a government places all of its hopes in a fortified mountain, the question is no longer whether that mountain can be reached. The real question is how much it would cost to do so, and whether the key decisions were made long ago. To understand this, it is necessary to examine the target selection chain currently operating over Iran. This is precisely the kind of detail that rarely receives attention in mainstream media, yet it is also the element that changes how every diplomatic statement emerging from Tehran should be interpreted. The first link in that chain is the RC-135 rivet joint. The U.S. Air Force operates 22 aircraft of this type, and they represent one of the most extensively used electronic intelligence platforms in its military inventory. Various assessments indicate that several of them remain deployed at regional bases, conducting continuous surveillance operations over Iranian nuclear facilities around the clock. The rivet joint does not carry bombs or missiles. It does not need to. Its mission is to capture every electronic signal associated with Iran's nuclear program. It intercepts communications between enrichment facilities, analyzes fluctuations in the electrical grid consistent with active centrifuges, detects radar emissions, and tracks logistical movements linked to the transport of sensitive materials. Every time something moves near a known facility, the system records the activity and updates available intelligence almost in real time. From the Iranian perspective, it is virtually impossible to know when a particular observation was recorded or exactly what information was collected. In practice, it functions as a permanent audit of everything Tehran considers concealed. The second layer is made up of the F-35A. During Operation Midnight Hammer in April 2025, these aircraft were the first to enter Iranian airspace. Using their advanced radars, distributed sensors, and electronic warfare systems simultaneously, they neutralized air defenses before other aircraft moved into action. They were the first to enter and the last to leave. Throughout the entire operation, Iranian air defenses never succeeded in obtaining a clear targeting solution against any of them. Those same aircraft currently continue conducting persistent patrols over the Strait of Hormuz, providing real-time tactical information to the entire joint force deployed throughout the region. The primary advantage of the F-35 is that it can observe the complete defensive picture before the rest of the formation has even begun its approach. The third component is the F-22 Raptor, deployed at various locations across the region, with one essential mission: ensuring air superiority. Its role is to clear the operational environment so that any platform following behind can operate in airspace free from threats and interference. Finally comes the aircraft that turns the challenge of the mountain into a technically manageable problem: the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. This platform can carry up to 30,000 pounds of ordnance, including the massive ordnance penetrator, the most powerful conventional bunker-penetrating munition in the U.S. arsenal, weighing approximately 30,000 pounds. It was designed specifically to strike deeply buried and heavily protected targets. Iran chose to conceal its uranium beneath approximately 280 feet of solid granite because it assumed that depth would guarantee protection. However, the massive ordnance penetrator was created specifically to address calculations of that kind. And this is where physics becomes just as important as politics, because this is the point at which Iranian strategic logic proves either correct or incorrect. Operation Midnight Hammer struck targets that were significantly less deep than those located within Pickaxe Mountain. That mountain represents a different challenge: harder rock, greater depth, and far more complex attack trajectories. Various reports indicate that U.S. Central Command has prepared flight plans that pass directly over that mountainous area. That is not a diplomatic signal. It is more accurately a mathematical statement about the capabilities of the B-2 and the calculations that are already incorporated into operational planning. Iran selected geological depth as its final line of defense. Meanwhile, all indications suggest that the U.S. military has spent the weeks following Midnight Hammer studying that depth from every possible angle and calculating exactly what would be required to overcome it. For that reason, the central question no longer appears to be whether the technical capability exists. The real uncertainty is whether the 60-day extension granted to the diplomatic process will produce a verifiable outcome before strike plans cease being a possibility and become a political decision. Now, let us bring all the pieces together, because this is where the broader strategic picture emerges, one that very few people are viewing as a single framework. Iran does not appear to be seeking to build a nuclear weapon for immediate use. What it truly seeks is for the possibility of such a weapon to remain as a permanent source of leverage in every future negotiation concerning the regional order that emerges after this conflict. From Tehran's perspective, the moment the 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% leave Iranian territory will be the moment the only card capable of guaranteeing influence in any agreement negotiated after the current confrontation comes to an end disappears. As long as that material remains protected inside the mountain, Iranian leaders believe they retain a form of power that cannot be ignored or removed through negotiations. That appears to be the logic behind every official statement, every diplomatic rejection, and every message communicated by the regime. It is not about confidence, and it is not about strength. It is the posture of a cornered actor maintaining a narrow strategic opening through a resource that, coincidentally, can be reached by an aircraft specifically designed for that purpose. And that is where the enormous weight behind this discussion lies. It is not only about the uranium, it is about the consequences of every possible path forward. If the arrangement proposed through Kazakhstan ultimately succeeds, Iran will preserve its governing structure and retain the opportunity to quietly rebuild capabilities at some location even deeper and more protected. In that scenario, the problem does not disappear, it is simply pushed into the future. On the other hand, if the situation is ultimately resolved through a military operation led by B-2 bombers, the material may disappear, but a large portion of the fragile stability that still exists across the region could disappear as well. And the consequences that follow are so extensive that no one appears to have calculated with precision where they might ultimately lead. The American veteran observing this situation, the military family that has borne the weight of similar decisions for 2 decades, and the taxpayer financing both the blockade and the continual replacement of military equipment are the people who ultimately absorb the cost of any possible outcome. They are not the policymakers, nor are they the defense companies producing new systems. It is ordinary people who ultimately pay the bill. That is the real figure attached to the 440 kilograms of uranium in tonight's strategic balance. So the central question becomes, what will happen over the next 30 days? Will we see the material transferred to Kazakhstan under international IAEA supervision, or will a military operation ultimately bring this negotiation to a definitive close? Leave your opinion in the comments and tell me which country you are following this analysis from. I want to hear perspectives from every region, because this discussion affects far more than a single nation. If this analysis provided information you did not find anywhere else, be sure to follow the channel. The next chapter of this story appears to be moving faster than any news cycle can keep up with, and all indications suggest that major developments could arrive sooner than many expect. You can also follow us on X and Instagram, and check the description for access to the complete analysis of weapon systems, military capabilities, and additional material related to this topic. And before we conclude, one final reflection presented in the form of an informal structural engineering review. A single star. We recently evaluated the ability of approximately 85 meters of Iranian granite to function as a strategic deterrent against a 30,000-pound penetrating munition traveling at terminal velocity. Preliminary findings suggest that the granite held a rather optimistic opinion of its own capabilities. The mountain awarded itself an outstanding rating. The massive ordnance penetrator, however, had a few additional questions. The expert review remains ongoing. Final results may arrive very soon.